We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis in Mesechet Kesuvos. This is Kesuvos Daf 17b. The Gemara here continues, Avol Laman Demasni, when it comes to somebody who teaches others, less le shiura. There is no amount that's considered sufficient in terms of the amount of people who deal with such an individual's burial. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah was talking about what are the signs at a wedding that the girl is a basula. So one of them is if she goes out in the hinuma. And the Gemara says, "My hinuma, what exactly is this hinuma?" Surchav bar papa mishmei de zeiri amar. Surchav bar papa says in the name of zeiri, tanura de asa, refers to the oven of myrtle. What it really means is the chuppah was made out of hadassim, and so that was a sign again that she was a basula. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, krisa de minamnima bakalsa. It was like a veil which the kala would doze off in. The idea was that the veil would cover her eyes, so people would not be able to see her closing her eyes, so she would sometimes sleep when she was wearing this veil. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer v'chulu. So again, they were talking about these different simonim, these different signs that take place at the wedding that show that the woman is a basula. And the Gemara says, Tana be Yehuda raya bebavel mai. So the Tana, he's giving us the proofs in Yehuda, meaning in the land of Yehuda, in the land of Israel. These are the things they used to do when there was a basula. But what about in Bavel? What are the signs that the girl is a basula in Bavel? And the Gemara says, Amar Rav says, Darduge de Mishcha Aresha de Rabbanan. Rashi over here explains, Darduge Mishcha Hanoshim Nosnim Shemen Berosh HaTalmidim V'Shafos. The women, they actually took oil and they would rub the oil on the heads of the Torah scholars, on the heads of the Rabbanan, and that was a sign that this woman who was at the wedding, that this kala was a basula. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Papa li Abaya. Rav Papa said to Abaya, Mishcha de chafifusa ka Amar Mar. Rashi over here says, Mishcha de chafifusa, Shemen shal besamim shemesukan lechupos ka Amar Mar, v'chibali chafifos hein lasuchan shemen. Are you talking about the oil that's used almost like a shampoo that's of besamim that they made? Is that what you're referring to over here? So Amar Le, so he said back to him, Yasma lo avdalach imach darduge mishcha aresha derabanan b'shas ma'isa. He said to him, you're like an orphan. Rashi over here says, Yasma yasumi minag hanoeg, meaning you're orphaned from this practice. This is a practice over here. Didn't your mother at the time that you were getting married, didn't your mother put this oil on the heads of the Rabbanan? And so the idea is that Rav Papa just wasn't familiar with this practice. So he said, what are you talking about? Like regular shampoo, so to speak. And again, Abai said back, you don't know the practice. This happened at your wedding as well. Again, your mother did this on the heads of the Torah scholars. And the Gemara continues, Kihada hume rabbanan diasik le livrei be Rabba Barula. There was a certain Torah scholar who arranged a wedding by the house of Rabba Barula. V'amrila, some say it was the reverse. Rabba Barula iasik le livrei be hume rabbanan. Rabba Barula arranged a wedding and married his son off to the house of this particular Rabbanan. V'dardig mishcha reisha de Rabbanan b'shas ma'isen, at the time of the wedding. So again, they put this oil on the heads of the Rabbanan. And the Gemara continues, our melasa mai. So what is the sign that the woman who's getting married is a widow? So the Gemara says, Tani Rav Yosef taught our melasa when it comes to the widow, les lo kisni. Rashi over here says, les lo kisni, ein lo kloyos. She doesn't have those roasted grains at the wedding, v'zeh simonin. This is the sign that she is an almana. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yoshua ba'omer lechaveiro v'chulu. So the Mishnah said that Rabbi Yoshua admits if a person says to his friend that this particular field, it belonged to your father, but I purchased it. So we say that's like a pesha or peshitter, and the person is believed to say that it's his field, because again, without him telling us that it belonged to the other person's father, we wouldn't have even known that. So again, if he says that, he's believed. And so the Gemara says, Velisni, but why don't we learn a much more simple case? Moder Rabbi Yoshua, we should say as follows. Rabbi Yoshua admits, Ba'omer lechaveiro sadazu shalcha. When somebody says to his friend, this field belonged to you. Shalcha, he said, this was your field, ulakachtia mimcha, and I bought it from you. What do you have to involve the father over here? And so the Gemara says, no, the reason is, Mishum dekaboy lemisni seifa, because what do we want to say at the end of the phrase in the Mishnah? We want to say, Im yesh edim shehi shalo. Let's say there are independent witnesses that say it belongs to him, or it belonged to the father. V'omer lekachtia mimenu, and then he says that I bought it from him. Eino nemon, he would not be believed. And so that line, that works well when you're talking about the situation with the father, as we're about to explain, but it's not going to work well when we're talking to the person himself. And the Gemara now clarifies, hey Chidami, what exactly would be the case? Now, if the person is there for the years of chazaka, there's a halacha that if a person is 3 years on a property, he makes a chazaka on the property, we presume it's his. So if he was there for the proper amount of time, And why shouldn't he be believed? He's been there for 3 years already. It's assumed to be his property. Now, if he was not there for the 3 years of chazaka, and of course he's not believed. If you have independent witnesses that it belongs to the other guy, then this person hasn't been there for the 3 years. Of course, it goes to the person who we presume it belongs to him. And so therefore, there would be no case there where if you have independent witnesses, there would be no situation over there would be too obvious that he's not going to be believed, or if he had shnei chazaka, it'd be obvious that he'd be allowed to keep the land. But the Gemara says, okay, why is it any better by the father? If so, Gabi Aviv Nami, by the father also. If the person was there for the requisite amount of time for a chazaka, the 3 years, Amai lo mehem, and why is he not believed? And if he wasn't there for the years of chazaka, Pshita de lo mehem, and then it's too obvious that he's not believed. And so the Gemara answers, Bishlama Gabayov, if I understand, let's say we're talking about the property of his father, Mashkachas la, so then we could find the case where again he's not going to be believed, but it won't be obvious. It can come out as follows, Kagon Sha'achla Shtayim B'chayav. Let's say he was there for 2 years while the father was alive, he was there on the property. V'yachas B'chay Beno, and then he was there for 1 year during the time of the son. Uchid Rav Huna, and it follows Rav Huna, the reason why he doesn't make a chazak is like Rav Huna says. The Yomer Rav Huna, because Rav Huna says, Ein machzikin b'nichsei katan. The halach is, you're not allowed to make a chazak in the property of a katan, because the idea is that when a person is a child, he doesn't know anything about property, he doesn't know to protest, and therefore the fact that you're sitting on the property is no proof, and it doesn't create a chazaka. And Rav Huna goes even further and says, Afilu higdil, that's true even when the katan becomes an adult, even if you're there for many years. Rashi says, while the katan, after the katan has already gotten older, it's still not a chazaka, because when he was an adult, he doesn't know what was going on. He's seen you on this property the entire time since he was a child, and he has no idea that this property belonged to his father. Then somebody tells him it belonged to his father, so he protests. So the idea is you can never make a chazak in that fashion, b'nichsei katan, and that's exactly the case of our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, the reason why the person does not get the property, even though he apparently was there for many years and should have a chazak, is because, again, that chazaka began while this son was still a minor. But the Gemara says, 1 second, but according to that, so Rav Huna made this statement here of Ein machzikin b'nichsei katan, but that's exactly what our Mishnah is saying, and you're saying that's the only interpretation of our Mishnah. So Rav Huna is just teaching us something that's in a Mishnah. And so the Gemara answers, if you want, I could say, Rav Huna diyuka demasnisim kamar. Rav Huna is telling us the inference from the Mishnah. You're right, it's not a chiddush, it's exactly what the Mishnah is saying, but you have to infer it, you have to derive it from the Mishnah, and that's what Rav Huna is teaching us. And if you want, I could say, afilu higdil kamashmal, and what he's teaching us is, even when the katan becomes older, you could have interpreted the Mishnah that we're talking about when he was a minor, not necessarily even after he becomes older, that it's not a chazaka. So Rav Huna is saying, no, even when the katan becomes older, even if you continue to be on the property for many years, that's not going to create a chazaka. And so the Gemara says, 1 second, Velisnia bididei, but still, why not have the entire Mishnah talk about a case where it's his field, nothing to do with the father? Velukma kagon sha'achla shtayim b'fanav, and let it be that for 2 years he was on the property in front of the person. V'yachas shalo b'fanav, but there was 1 year where he was on the property and making his chazaka, but the original owner was no longer there. Uchagon shabarach, and for example, he had to run away for some reason. He wasn't present, so therefore he couldn't protest, and therefore that's why the chazaka is not a good chazaka. And so the Gemara says, well, Barach Machmas Mai, why did the real owner, why did he run away? Ida Barach Machmas Nefashas, if he ran away because he feared for his life, so Pshita de lo mehemen, obviously the chazak is not going to be good and he's not believed. De lo matzi machi, the person who's running for his life can't protest, so again, it's obvious that's not a chazaka. V'id barach machmas mammon, and if you're going to say that he's just running away because he's got creditors, people are trying to take money from him, so he wanted to get away, so there it for sure is a chazaka. The original owner should have protested. Because we hold that a macha, even not in front of the person, is considered a good macha. Rashi over here says, "V'lisni b'didei sadazu shalchahai." So again, it should be this field really belonged to you, and then I purchased it from you. Im yesh edim. So if there's independent edim that it belonged to that original person, eino namon, he's not believed. V'yafagav sha'achla shnei chazaka, and even though he was there for the years of chazaka, ukagon shayu shtayim b'fanav v'acha shalo b'fanav, because one of the years, again, he was not present. Kagon shabarach v'ashmin and dahi shasa lo salkalei. The chiddush is that year that he's away doesn't count as a year of chazaka. And so the Gemara says, "Yibarach machmas mammon she'eno yorim in amalchus ela mitzakas hatzokim ba'ir." He's not afraid of the government. He's just there's some people bothering him in the city. Iboy leila mechuyev b'makom shusham. He should have just protested where he was. V'keven delo micha chazaka mal yasi. And if he didn't protest when he could have, so then it really is a good chazaka. And how do we know that a macha shelo b'fanav is a macha? The Tanan, because we learned in the Mishnah, shalosh arotzas lechazaka. There are three separate areas, three separate lands in Eretz Yisrael when it comes to chazaka. We divided into three: Yehuda, Ve'ever HaYarden, V'HaGalil. There's Yehuda, and then there's the other side of the Yarden, and then there's the area of the Galil. Haya b'Yehuda v'hechzik b'Galil. Let's say he's in Yehuda and he makes the chazaka in Galil, or b'Galil v'hechzik b'Yehuda, or the guy's in Galil and the chazaka is taking place in Yehuda. Ein a chazaka, that's not a good chazaka. Ad sheyei imo b'Medina. He has to be together with him in the same exact Medina, in the same exact section of the country. V'havina, but we asked a question on that Mishnah. Ma'ikosavar, what exactly does the author of this Mishnah hold? Ikosavar if we hold that a protest not in front of him is a good protest, so afilu b'Yehuda v'Galil nami. So even if, let's say, the original owner is in Yehuda and the chazaka is being made in Galil, it should still be good because you have the ability to protest shelo b'fanav. V'gosamer macha shelo b'fanav lo have macha. And if he holds that a macha shelo b'fanav is not a good macha, so afilu Yehuda v'Yehuda nami lo. Even if it was all in Yehuda, but it was in different cities in Yehuda, that also should not be a good situation. It should not be a good chazaka because, again, you can't protest shelo b'fanav according to that. So what exactly is this Mishnah saying? So Amar Rabbi Abba bar Mamel, so Rabbi Abba bar Mamel said on this, Liolam kasavar macha shelo b'fanav have macha. Really, this Mishnah holds macha shelo b'fanav is considered a good macha. That's why we're bringing this Mishnah again, because we hold macha shelo b'fanav is a good macha. Umas nizin b'shas chayrim shanu. But our Mishnah is talking about in a situation of chayrim, meaning where there's a situation where it was impossible to travel between one section and the other. There was a prohibition of traveling between the different areas, and that's why in this particular case, normally macha shelo b'fanav would be a good macha, but here it's really impossible to protest, and therefore you cannot make a chazaka, let's say, from Yehuda to Galil. And the Gemara says, U'ma'ishna Yehuda v'Galil denakad. Well, if it's talking about a chayrim, so who cares Yehuda and Galil? Anytime, just say anytime there's a chayrim. As Rashi over here says, U'ma'ishna Yehuda v'Galil denakad, am yesh chayrim nami me'ir le'ir. If there would be some kind of ban on travel from one city to the other, afilu shtei ayoros bosa Medina nami lo, even if it would be two cities in the same Medina, the same would be true. So why do you have to specifically say Yehuda and Galil? And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph.